Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and I'm here to just do a beginner's introduction to tarot. I actually had a friend of mine who was with me all those many years ago when I purchased my very first tarot deck. She has just received her very first tarot deck in the mail, which is actually this one, the Force of Enchantment Tarot by Lunia Weatherstone, illustrated by Marilla Allwood. I have a walkthrough of this already that I did again for her, but while she's been around me for a very long time, tarot and oracle and these types of things are not her thing, so she really doesn't know much at all about tarot. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to just do a basic introduction to tarot for the beginner. Whoa. And that was intended to wake you up to this exciting prospect. So tarot is a very old system that originated from playing cards. This is a beautiful modern rendition of playing cards, but in playing cards you have 52 cards. You have the numbers 1 through 10, and then you have at least in modern renditions, you have a jack, a queen, and a king. In other ones you might have different variations in older versions of playing cards where they would be all men sometimes, as what was often the case. In tarot, we see what the structure that we see today, which is 78 cards, we see first showing up around the mid 1400s with the Madrone Tarot, as well as the beautiful it's an example of this Visconti Sforza. So this is a replication of what it looked like, or looks like now with the aging process, and what we have the remnants of. And some of these have had to be remade because they've just been lost over time. But this took the core of a playing card system, but added in a triumph or a major arcana of cards, and it was for a trick-taking card game. And so then there were 22 cards that were added to it. But you can see that these basic setup of tarot has been around for a very long time, and stemmed from Italy and France area, out of the Roman Catholic mindset. And so of course in the triumphs or the major arcana, you will see cards such as the Devil and Judgment and Lover's card, looking sometimes very similar to the Garden of Eden, and these types of imageries that would have gone on. So we see a combination of the normal playing card deck, in this case with 4 court cards, which are most often seen as a page, a knight, a queen, and a king, as well as the 22 cards in the major arcana, being pulled together, somewhere around the mid 1400s, certainly when we had the Madrone and the Sforza coming into existence with that format. It is still a system that is used in playing card games as well, but it also developed, as all things playing cards at the time, as well as moving into tarot, being used for divination of different types. So that's just a brief historical introduction. I'm trying to put these out of the way and making a mess out of it. So we have these beautiful things such as this, up until, and various renditions of this. I have a lot of, I'll have to redo, if I have a video where I go through the kind of the historical decks in a row that I have. I can't remember. I do it for my classes, but I don't remember if I have a separate video. If not, I'll add that to my list, because it's kind of neat to see the shifts and changes, not just across time, but it also as it spreads to other countries. There are different variations. This continues until the let's say I would say about 1909. I don't have the dates in front of me, but I believe it's 1909, where we had actually two things happening around the same time. There was a organization called the Golden Dawn, which was an esoteric organization that really was gathering up all kinds of esoteric information about astrology and Kabbalah and just all of the different interesting things of the time. And one of the things that their members would do was, when they reached a certain level in the organization, they would create their own tarot deck to reflect the correspondences of the Golden Dawn. And two such people are important to note just in this introductory video. One of them is Arthur E. Waite, with the illustrator Pamela Coleman Smith, who created the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. And so this took what up until that time were beautifully illustrated pip decks of varying degrees of illustration, some just having literally 5 swords with no decorations around it, some being elaborately decorated, and some even having scenes in them. But the writer Arthur E. Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith did go about creating scenes so for example, the Four of Wands was not just 4 wands sitting there, but it had a scene that reflected their correspondence to that card. Now, the Minor Arcana gets a little problematic here, in my personal opinion, simply because we do know that it was pulled from various different sources, some from playing card divination, some from really old decks like the Solabusca. So there were various sources, some from Matella. There were various sources that were pulled together to create the minors, which created its own sort of system based on the correspondences to the Golden Dawn, as well as, again, pulling from various sources to flesh out their meanings of the Minor Arcana. You see one major shift here as well in the leading up to this point, as the Major Arcana order, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, became solidified. We see Justice at 8 and Strength at 11. In the Rider-Waite-Smith system, because they were trying to create something similar to their correspondences, they swapped and put Strength at 8 and Justice at 11 because it fit their astrological correspondences better that way. And so you'll see that swap, and henceforth we see decks that a lot of times have Strength at 8 and Justice at 11, but sometimes you will see those differently. It's not because they've done it wrong, it's because they've gone back to before that swap was made. The other person who was doing something similar was Aleister Crowley. He created the Thoth Tarot, which is again based on Golden Dawn correspondences. It is far more pip-like, but still with a powerful use of color to really bring to life the meanings of the pip cards, even without there being scenes on the cards. So this was released as well, and so you get a rough break off of 3 versions or pathways of tarot from the original pip-based playing card styled historical decks. There are variations in there as well, but that's not the scope of this particular video. To the Rider-Waite-Smith system, again, based off of Golden Dawn correspondences of Arthur E. Waite. And then we have the Thoth system, which is another variation of the Golden Dawn system as put out by Crowley. There are definite differences between the two. This would be argued to be probably the closest to the Golden Dawn, this probably being the closest to a way in which it makes things easily accessible to the average person versus people of the time versus people who were involved in the esoteric organization. So that's very brief, very brief history of tarot. And of course, since this time in the early 1900s, there have been an explosion of decks that pull very often from the Rider-Waite-Smith, sometimes from the Thoth, less often. Certainly receive and are seeing more and more decks that reflect back to, harken back to my favorite of pip decks, decks that combine all three systems in one way or another to, you know, various degrees of success, and also decks that are going forward and making tweaks based on what they're trying to do. For example, you see that a little bit in the Forest of Enchantment Tarot, where the focus is on storytelling and the linear progression of storytelling, and so there are shifts and tweaks made to follow that pathway that is in the mindset of the creator. So I'm going to put these away for a minute. Oh dear, and try not to throw the cards while doing so. I have a ton of decks, and I have tons and tons of walkthroughs on my channel, so that you can just kind of hit the scroll bar and point your finger, and you'll probably find some sort of deck review to take a look at. But I just wanted to bring out a couple examples. Well, this I'm bringing out as an example. This is the New Choice Tarot de Marseille, and this is just an example that even today we are seeing beautiful renditions of the classic pip style. So when you hear somebody say a pip, they are simply saying that in the minor cards, where the Four of Pentacles, instead of having a scene that describes that creator's understanding of the card, you literally see 4 pentacles or 2 swords. They're illustrated, so they're not unillustrated minors. They are illustrated, beautifully illustrated minors, but they don't have scenes on them, giving you some indication of what this might mean. Now, this is wonderful if, like me, you really approach tarot from number in the pips as the number of the pip, so the number 3 plus, or I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on, but this is the number 4, with the 4 swords that are here. So I would combine what the suit of swords means to me, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, with what the number 4 means to me, and come up with my meaning that way. It's actually a really easy way to be able to read, in a very consistent way to be able to read. And there are beautiful decks being created even today, following that format of non-scenic pip. So that's the only reason I wanted to show that. Some really great decks I find to be for beginners, and I need to do a whole video on this, but I didn't want to start yanking decks out. I just wanted to sort of give an idea here. I do think the Shadowscapes Tarot by Stephanie Poo-Moon Law is a wonderful and beautiful deck to be able to use, with gorgeous sort of fae imagery, but stays close enough to the Rider-Waite-Smith that you can see those meanings there as you're trying to learn the base understandings of the cards. I think it works beautifully. For my daughter, I chose to recommend, she has other decks, but I chose to recommend for her to start with the Shadowscapes Tarot as her sort of main deck when she wants to approach learning tarot. So obviously, if I recommend it to my daughter, I would recommend it to you. The Druidcraft Tarot is another one that I often recommend to people, especially if you want to get away maybe from some of the Christian connotations, such as the devil, the judgment kind of cards, the Garden of Eden imagery, these types of things. If you lean towards more earth-based religions or mindsets, this is a beautiful example of sort of a Celtic world that kind of combines druidry and witchcraft or Wicca or these types of things. Very earth-based, and you can see the dance between the Lord and the Lady across the major arcana. So it is a wonderful deck. It is a workhorse deck for me. I've used it in tons of readings. And if you get the version, now this version just has a little guidebook, but there is a version with a full guidebook, and it is a really fantastic guidebook, which I think is important for beginners. This also has a larger guidebook you can get. Both of these you can also get on phone apps that have the full versions of the guidebooks in the apps, which can be handy when you are learning. So that's a great nature-based one that I also recommend. I really hold to my initial belief that the Fountain Tarot is a beautiful modern example of the Rider-Waite-Smith. It is just gorgeous. I love the artwork that definitely has a modern flair, but it's just beautiful. It's clean. It expresses the cards, I think, in a powerful way, and I do think it is an amazing. If you were looking for something slightly more modern feel to it, I think you can't go wrong with the Fountain Tarot. And my phone is going a little blowing up a bit. The other one is one of my favorites, and this is the Darkness of Light Tarot. There's a different version up right now, which isn't my favorite because I think it has white instead of the black edges, and I absolutely adore the black edges. This is one of my most used tarot decks. It is, again, a beautiful, very classic feel to the cards, but just gorgeous. There is some nudity involved. There's also some nudity in the Druidcraft, if that is something that you're going to see that in some tarot decks. Our bodies are things of wonder. Don't let it concern you too much. We all have bodies underneath the clothes that we wear. But if that is of concern to you, there's definitely some nudity. I don't think there's any nudity in here, but I am not going to promise that you don't see a breast or two. I don't pay attention to it too much. I know it certainly isn't excessive. The Druidcraft people have the most problem with the Hanged Man, which does have quite a frontal nudity to the male genitalia. But I find it to be an amazing, beautiful deck, and it's not gratuitous, it's not based, it's not sexual, it is just the human body. So I find this to be a beautiful, this is often quite appealing to men, even though, again, I absolutely love it. It is one of my all-time favorites, so by no means is it just focused for men, but I do find that aesthetically men tend to really be drawn to this deck. So there's just a couple options. There are tons more. Again, at some point I will try to do a video of a lot of different beginners deck, but I was just pulling some from my favorites just to give you an idea that there are a lot of decks out there that work well for beginners. For me, what works well, what's important for beginners is that there is a clear the theme to it is clear, that there is some degree of clarity in how the minors and things like that are portrayed and progressed, that you can use. Many of the books that you will buy today are books that are going to be focused on the Rider-Waite-Smith, and so all of these, while they may have different themes to them, you're going to at least be able to see the basic idea of the Rider-Waite-Smith system. Now, while I think having a really solid guidebook to get you started in a beginner's deck is really important, for 9.5 years, all I had was the guidebook for the Llewellyn Tarot, which I also think is an amazing beginner's deck. However, it does deviate from some of the standard titles and things of that nature, which is one of the appeals for me. But there are also so many books out there that it can be overwhelming, and I think that the beginners can fall into sort of the trap of gaining tons of books and getting stuck in the books versus just getting the cards on the table. So I would be careful of that. I didn't start, I read with tarot for 9.5 years before I was at a point in which I would start to collect books or lots of decks, and so I had already fairly well learned how I was going to read tarot, and put some time into learning the Rider-Waite-Smith system as well. So I don't actually have tons of books. I tried to keep my reference books to a minimum. The one that I do highly recommend is Rachel Pollack's Tarot Wisdom. What I love about this one over some of the others is that she gives you examples of, so it's going into the Minor Arcana. Let me just find she gives you lots of information. But what I love is that you'll see she's giving you, here's some Rider-Waite-Smith examples. Here's some modern renditions from her own deck. Here is the Solabusca Three of Swords compared to the Rider-Waite-Smith Three of Swords. So you're getting lots of different deck examples. So for example, here is the Two of Swords. She's giving you the Two of Swords image from the Sforza. She's giving you from a couple modern decks, from the Solabusca, from the Rider-Waite-Smith, from Thoth. This one, Marseille. This I think this is a Marseille deck. I don't know which one. I can't quickly find it. But anyways, as you can see, for the Two of Swords, she doesn't lock you right into just the Rider-Waite-Smith versions of the card, but gives you a wide example of these cards in these different styles of decks. I think that's such an important thing because you can really start to see the way that they can be expressed differently, but still we can get to very similar ideas behind them, and or open ourselves up to going in different directions. So that's one of the things that I love. The other thing that I really love is that she gives a historical progression in some way of how the card would have been interpreted across different areas. Now, I don't know if that's actually that. Like the Rider-Waite-Smith theme, we have the Golden Dawn title that's there. We have the decans that it might have been approached to. Let me see if I can find an example of what I'm talking about here. Here we go. So within the text itself, some death meanings. These are from different ones, and she gives you today how it was maybe determined in 1750, 1780, 1773, 1855 by Levi, 1870 by Christian, Mathers in 1888, the Golden Dawn, the Grand Orient, and the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning. So you're actually seeing how the actual meaning of the card also shifts and moves through history, and it's going to continue to shift and move as we grow and experience and work with the cards ourselves. So that is why for one book that I would personally recommend, if you had one book and just stuck with that for a while, it would be the Tarot Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. That is not to say there aren't a ton of other wonderful books out there, but to get started, this is what I would recommend, and for those reasons. So now that's that for just kind of leading us up. Let's take a look at the sort of setup and the structure of tarot. So let's take a look at the breakdown of a tarot deck, and for this I'm going to be using the Spirit Within Tarot by Stephen Bright. a friend of mine who in the internet world, who I think did a really amazing job. This is another deck that I would recommend as a beginner's deck. I think the images, because they're using silhouettes, are very clear. I like the colored coding where you get, if you look at the top halves of the cards, you get a very green feel for the pentacles, very watery feel for the cups, a very yellow toned to the tops of the swords, which is a traditional color associated with air, and a very orangey toned top for the wands, which are associated with fire. We're going to talk about all that in a minute. And I just love the use of silhouettes here, and it is a very modern feeling deck as well, very clean, very modern, and another deck that I recommend for beginners as well. So here you see the tarot deck broken into its pieces. We have 22 cards of the Major Arcana. The Fool card is not numbered, or is sometimes numbered 0. The other card traditionally not numbered is number 13, the Death card, which is often, especially in historical decks, not numbered at all. The order of the Major Arcana did have some variations as things were settling into where it was going to be. I've already discussed the swapping of the Strength and the Justice card. There are some more modern decks like this deck that don't put any numbers whatsoever on the cards. This is useful because if you see Strength as 8 and Justice at 11, you can swap those around no matter what. So you'll see variations on whether it's numbered, how they're numbered, these types of things. But things have pretty well solidified into this particular order, which we'll go over in a minute. The Major Arcana is seen as large energy, big energy that is at play. These are larger archetypes that we're going to see. We also see a lot of talk about this being the Fool's journey. So here we have the Fool who stands outside of the numbers, and through all of these we see this journey that the Fool goes on until he gets all the way to the World card, and then he steps, in my opinion, he steps back through the laurel wreath and starts over again in this eternal process of becoming a human being. There's many ways to break down the Major Arcana. Again, the purpose of this video is to give a basic breakdown of the tarot deck for beginners, and it's important to note that the Major Arcana is that larger energy. So when it shows up in a reading, there's a bit more punch to it. There's a bit larger energy shifts that may be taking place to pay attention to when you see the Major Arcana. Next, you have the 4 suits. So again, remember this is based off of a set of playing cards. Instead of there being 3 courts, there are 4 courts here. Those courts can change depending on the particular deck that you are using. Traditionally, you will see, we're gonna lay those out in just a minute, but traditionally you'll see a page, a knight, a queen, and a king. Sometimes you will see a princess, a prince, a queen, and a king. Sometimes you will see a daughter, a son, a mother, and a father. And sometimes you will see things that are completely different based on the theme of the deck that is there. But in any case, it is the court system that we see, and then we see the numbers from 1 to 10. So each of the 4 suits has 10 numbered cards and 4 court cards in them. There are 4 suits that in the past historically did not have elemental associations attached to them. They have relatively settled into what you're primarily going to see in decks, in that you will see wands that often have some sort of a wand or a staff or a piece of wood of some sort in the in the image, and it is related to, often in a modern sense, related to the element of fire. So this is a suit about creativity, it's a suit about transformation, it's about a high energy, moving energy of fire. I'll talk about exceptions in one second. We have the suit of swords, which is related to air, which is the element of the mind. This is the element of our intellect, our thought processes, growth of the mind. It is the most combative of the suits in terms of a sword and fighting. And you will see a lot of pulling in the Rider-Waite-Smith from the playing card divination, which has the spades as being quite harsh, and so that can be a little bit problematic depending on how you read tarot, but in general, the suit of swords is related to the air, and it is important to remember, regardless of the image that you might see. For example, the Ten of Swords often will show somebody laying dead on the ground. I quite love this version. This person has been beset by many a sword, but is still standing. He is the culmination of the suit of the mind, taking all of that in and becoming and growing the stronger for it. So we have that. Now, what you will sometimes see is a swapping of these, and this is just related to the system. It relates to tradition of a particular group of people that might sometimes have the fire related to sword. When you're forging a sword, you plunge it, or you're heating it up with fire, whereas the wands are related to air because you're waving them about in the air, I suppose. Again, I'm not sure the reasonings behind that, but you will occasionally in decks see those swapped. But I would say for the majority of modern decks that you're going to purchase today, you will see wands as fire, swords as air, cups as water. This is relating to the emotions. This is relating to the way our emotions connect us with other people in relationships. This is also relating to that internal power source that the waters of the High Priestess. And then lastly, the suit of pentacles or coins or stones or earth. That is related to earth, the more practical side, the more grounded side, the side in which we are growing and learning in our business and working hard and succeeding and all of the things that are going to happen in the more physical realm of earth. Now, in terms of, you can see this deck very nicely in the aces, shows a wand, a sword, a cup, and a pentacle here. Those suits will change sometimes. Sometimes the swords might be feathers for the intellect and writing things down. Sometimes the cups might be a vessel or a chalice or a shell or something like that. Sometimes the pentacles are stones. Sometimes they are pentacles. Sometimes they are coins like money. So you will see a variation on that they generally make some degree of sense to those given elemental breakdowns. So let me take the suit of swords here, just because it is my favorite suit, and just quickly show. We have our aces. Now, aces are important because they are both the first spark of their suit, of the energy of their suit, but they're also the full potential of their suit. So aces for me are really powerful when they show up, and I pay attention to them similarly to the way that I'll pay attention to a major arcana. But we have ace, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have the 10 10 pips, or the 10 numbered cards of each of the minor arcana. A good guidebook will give you information about the numbers. Aces or ones are about new beginnings and new potentials. Twos, the number 2 is about coming together, right? You have two things coming together. You have a balance of two things. Sometimes things are coming together. Sometimes things are pushing it apart, but it is that relationship between two things. Threes are about growth in some way, that suit. So in this case, because it's the swords, which is the suit of the mind, the number 3 for me is about growth of the mind. Now, often in Rider-Waite-Smith, you will see heartbreak here. We grow from painful situations, but we also grow from positive situations. And so if you are strictly following the Rider-Waite-Smith, it has got a more of a negative connotation to that growth. If you are following a more numerical system the way I do, it is simply an indication of growth of the mind occurring because of experiences around us. The 4 is about stability and structure and sometimes rest. The 5s are disruptive numbers. In some way, the energy is going to be shooken up. Shooken up is not a word, but it is expressive of the energy. The 6 is about that shake-up of the 5, finding some harmony and some balance. The 7s are interesting because they are often about new growth that comes from stability. So if you take the 4 plus the 3, you've got some stabilizing element that is going to result in new growth. In the suit of swords, or the suit of swords in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, it's often known as the thief card. Something is being taken away. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going beneath the surface. But if we can establish what's going on beneath the surface, we're going to find that growth that's going to occur there. The number 8s are 4 plus 4, right? So we have really solid mastery and structure that can be restrictive, right? Think about stability, but when you double stability, you can start to get a bit of restriction, which we often see, especially in the 8 of swords. The number 9s are dynamic energy. It's a lot of energy. We have a little energy versus a lot. Energy's bouncing off the wall, and it can be really powerful access to that energy, but it can also be very overwhelming. So you'll see with the 9 of swords, anxiety, having nightmares, things that are blown out of proportion in our mind. And then the number 10 is the culmination of the suit, whatever that may be. And so you see this kind of coming full circle of the suit, of the energy of the suit. This is where, for me, in the swords, you most see a problematic in the Rider-Waite-Smith system, in that the suit of the number 10 is about culmination of a suit. In a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, you will see a person laying on the ground with 10 swords in them, dead on the ground. For me, the culmination of the suit of the mind is not death. It is really about kind of coming full circle on an idea. Now, sometimes that means that that cycle is done and it's time to start a fresh idea, which is how you can see if you have a deck that has somebody laying dead, and I have plenty of them on the ground. It's just that understanding that there's an end of a cycle of thought. It's time to let that go and move into the fresh cycle that the page is going to represent. But in general, there are, we think, how are we going to remember all of these minor cards here? It's kind of it's easier with the major arcana because they represent archetypes. But how do we remember all of these minors? It's just 10 numbers to remember plus 4 elements so that you can always plug and play. If you grab a 6 of cups, you can say to yourself, well, the number 6 is about harmony and rebalancing, and the suit of cups is about feelings and emotions. So it is a harmonizing or balancing of the emotions in some way. So very quickly and easily, you're able to at least start to come up with a meaning of each of the cards that you pull. Good books that you have should go into their representations of the numbers, and I believe, as I say that, 255, can I quickly find it here? I'm not entirely sure. There's the World card. Here is the Minor Arcana information, the suits, talking about each one of the suits and the elements. And then she talks about the numbers. So she goes into an understanding of how the numbers work, what each one of the numbers, and you're going to see variations of some, so I can't even see that. You're going to see variations on that, but you see a lot of the same things come into general access, and we all have to come up with what works for us individually, but a good guidebook or a good book on tarot is going to give you information about the suits, then information about each of the numbers, and then it's just remembering 10 numbers plus 4 suits and plugging those together. The number plus the suit equals a basic meaning, which will get you started down the road to figuring out what the card means when you pull it. So that's the number cards of each one of the suits, 1 through 10, and then we move into the court system. Now, there are many ways in which to interpret the court system. Some people, especially in older traditional tarot, would see these as actual people with actual eye color associated with each of the suits, hair color associated with each of the suits, kind of a pull again back from traditional playing card divination. In a modern sense of the word, it can still represent people depending on what kind of readings that you do. I don't tend to do readings in which a ton of people are involved because I'm generally working with a single person who were just doing work on themselves. And so for me, the court cards represent how energy is moving in the reading. So when a court card shows up, I'm always very excited because it gives me an idea about how the energy is moving and in what type, depending on the energy of the suit, is there. So Marie White, in her guidebook for the Marielle Tarot, I think really beautifully, succinctly lined out how I see the Minor Arcana's court cards. The pages are usually young people. It's youthful energy. It's initiating energy. It's energy that's just starting. There's learning that's involved. Traditionally, it can also have to do with messages. The knights are out questing. Now, in this case, we don't see them on horses, but very often you will see them on horses or moving in some way. This is very active, moving energy with the knights of their suit. So in this case, active movement of the mind because it's the suit of the swords. The queens are creating the environment of their suit. They are setting you, they're asked for me personally, again, lots of ways to interpret each of these things. But in general, for when a queen shows up, it's telling me, how do you need to set up your world, your environment, so that energy has its best chance to grow. So in the case of the suit of swords, what do you need to do in your physical world so that your mind has the best chance of kind of like calming down, of growing, of getting more stable, depending on what's, the question is and what's needed. The kings are full masters of their suit, right? They're mini emperors in which they have come to a sense of mastery over that particular energy, and they're wielding that in a sense of confidence and in a sense of their own power. So we see that when one of these will show up in a reading, it gives me an idea so that if the for example, let's pick a different one here. We haven't used a wands here, so let me get to the court. So if the King of Wands shows up, this is about creativity and transformation, really high, powerful, active energy. And the king is saying, okay, you need to bring some structure to that. You need to step in and really assert your own power in this particular situation. Shouldn't be running willy-nilly. If the knight were to come up, we would say, okay, there's a lot of creative energy that's at play, but you need to be running with that, right? You need to be off questing and going off and pursuing your passions, pursuing active transformation and these sorts of things. So we have this barometer with the court cards that lets us say, okay, what is the energy at play? Because we have the suit that tells us the energy, whether it's fire, water, earth, or air. And then we also have the actual court figure, which will tell us some degree of how that energy energy is moving, or maybe even how that energy needs to be moving, again, depending on the question at play. So we have a major arcana with all of the progress, and we're going to take a peek at those in just a second, with all of the progression of archetypes. We have the 4 minor arcana suits with 1 through 10 on each of them, showing a progression of that energy, as well as a court system that gives us an idea of how that energy is moving and flowing, and or needs to be moving and flowing. And those two things together, the major arcana and the minor arcana, are what comprise a tarot deck. Now I'm going to quickly, this is not, I'm not going to flip through every single card in this particular video, as that would take, again, I want to try to keep this more as just an introductory to the system of tarot versus a one-by-one go through of the cards. Any video that any walkthrough that I do will do that, but I want to at least do a quick run through of the major arcana so that you can see an idea of what I mean by larger archetypal energy. The Fool representing us, often seen as us, or also new experiences, new opportunities, the ever adventurous stepping out into the world, starting our journey. The Magician speaks to how all of the power that we need is within us and how we can use that to manifest into the world. The High Priestess dives into the mystic waters, into the inner self, into our inner power. The Empress, in modern decks, representing almost a Mother Earth sense of nurturing and creation. Older decks, you saw a lot of a female physical ruler that went hand in hand with the Emperor, but you'll often see the Empress out in nature, oftentimes pregnant. We have the Emperor, who is the traditional masculine ruler. He is structured, he is making the hard decisions that need to be made for the betterment of the whole situation versus the individual. The Hierophant, or the Pope, or the Papist in the older decks, is the traditional teacher. It is the understanding of tradition and how it is handed down, both the positive and the negatives of that, as well as just the idea of teaching that is often seen in modern decks. The Lover's card is about making a choice that has long-term consequences. We will often see an angel and a man and a woman, or in this case a bird. There's often some form of 3 where we understand the higher conscious, the conscious mind, and the unconscious mind, and making decisions that are in alignment with all 3 of those things will cause a good and long-term decision to be made. The Chariot is about moving forward in confidence. The Strength card often has a woman and a lion that's there, and that coming to terms with our inner and outer self, our primal and our civilized self, and coming into a balance of those 2 things is where our power really lies. The act of going inward and doing healing is what generates the strength that moves outward. The Hermit is the energy of needing to go off and take all of the experience that we've had and turn them into wisdom. And eventually also sometimes we will see a lantern where we can then shine that light for somebody else. The Wheel of Fortune reflects that lots of life is about shifts and changes and turns of the wheel, moving to the clear eyes of Justice, who cuts through emotions and sees through to the truth of the matter that is at hand. The Hanged Man, asking us to get a better perspective, get a different perspective, flip yourself upside down and see the world a little bit differently. The Death card, that major transformation of all the big cycle of life and death, big changes, big shifts, big growths are afoot. The Temperance card, bringing into balance the energies of fire and water, masculine and feminine. It is a combination of those things and combining them together, or mixing them together in this modern deck, that creates the true strength there. The Devil card being the abdication of our own power, giving over our power to something else, giving over our responsibility to something else. The devil made me do it, versus taking responsibility for our own power and our own choices. The Tower card comes in and shakes everything up in a major opportunity for rebuilding after the dust has settled, with the Star reminding you that you have what you need to navigate your way forward. Guidance is at hand. The Moon card with that shifting ethereal light of dark that can be not very clear all the time, but is a powerful opportunity to tap into, again, the waters of the High Priestess. Trust our instincts, trust our intuition. The Sun coming up and shining with a sense of confidence and happiness that comes from mastering our own self through all of these major arcana cards, so that we come out with that true happiness that comes from having done the work to master our own self and our own strengths. The Judgment card, often seen with an angel calling forth the dead, is a reminder to stop and assess how you got to where you are, so that you can move into the next life or the next existence or the next experience with clarity about how you got there, good, bad, and ugly, culminating with the World card, which is that sense of everything in balance, everything has come together, you've come full circle, all is as it should be, and then we step through the laurel wreath and back into the difficulty of then expressing and being open to new adventures after we've experienced all that life has to offer in the bumps and the highs and the lows that life has to offer. So that is, of course, a very quick rundown of the tarot deck and the ways in which learning to understand the number to 10, the number 1 through 10 and what that means, the 4 suits and what they mean, plugging those together for the minors, looking to the courts for how energy is moving, and then looking to those major arcana cards as big shifts and changes of energy that may be going on around you. Again, this is a very not very fast. I'm sure this video isn't going to be short, but it is a very condensed look at the tarot. The last thing that I want, I just want to throw a couple cards on the table. The last piece of the puzzle is taking all of those pieces together, or that are all separated, and bringing them together to tell a story. And when you're doing this, the big rule of thumb is make sure that you have a question at hand. It's hard to interpret cards if you have no question in your head. Even if you just want to know what is it you need to know right now, that's still a question. It's still focusing the reading. I would recommend that you start with a 3-card spread and stay with a 3-card spread for quite some time. It's very helpful in building a linear story of past, present, and future, what to let go of, what to hold on to, what to lean into as you move forward. There is a lot that can be garnered with 3 cards, no matter how you choose to read them, and it will help you to start to connect the energies of the cards versus seeing them as individual cards, because they really are interacting energies, and starting to get comfortable with combining them together is going to go a long way in helping you. Now, in terms of shuffling your cards, do what you like, right? Do what feels right. I am a riffle shuffler, which means I shuffle the cards much as you would do a deck of playing cards. Some people are horrified by that. It, in my opinion, makes the best mix outside of a wash. It makes the best mix of the cards, and it's something that I get great enjoyment over. And then I combine that with overhand shuffling, which is how a lot of people shuffle cards, which is to have it in one hand, pulls them up and, you know, drop it. You're going to have to figure out what feels comfortable for you. There is no right and wrong way to how you might shuffle the cards. You want to do it respectfully to your cards. They're your tool, and so treating the tool well is important. But however it works for you, you can lay it on the table and swish them all together and then pull them in together. That will result in cards being upright and upside down. Quick into the idea of, do you use reversals or do you not? Reversal just means that you allow a card to come upright as well as upside down, and you might change the meaning of the card based on whether the card is upside down or not. Whether you choose to do that is entirely up to you and what feels right to you. Some people stand by it being the only way to read. Others people say, oh no, never do that. There's no reason to do that. My opinion is to do as all things. Figure out what works for you and do it consistently. I do not read with reversals because I believe that the 78 cards, especially the way that I read them with the numbers and this and plugged together with the suits, is a very balanced system that doesn't need reversals to come into play in order to read it well-rounded. Other people love the use of reversals. Sometimes they use it to be the opposite of what the card means. So if the 9 of Cups means getting your wishes fulfilled, upside down you would not be getting those wishes fulfilled. Some people use it as just an exclamation point, that when that card comes up, they're going to pay special attention to that card because it's come up upside down. Again, there is no right and wrong way for you to use the tool that you have in your hand. Just figure out what feels best to you and apply that consistently, and you will be fine. Once you've shuffled your cards, you're going to want to lay them out on the table. Some people shuffle, 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 stop where they are, and just draw off of the top. That's one way to do it. Some people split the deck where they might make 3 piles randomly. Take the 3rd pile and that becomes the top pile, and you would deal off the top. Other people, like my daughter, she'll go through the whole deck until she feels a zing and she stops there, and we deal from the place where the zing occurred. Other people, like myself, do a bit of a drop shuffle where I just randomly will drop, and wherever that split occurs is where I start to shuffle or to deal the card. Lay the cards out. Now, in terms of 3 cards, I have my own peculiarity because I want the best opportunity for synchronicity. So I might do a couple riffles, some overhand shuffles. When I'm doing 3 cards, I drop the shuffle. I take the first card from here, the second card from the split, and the 3rd card from the bottom of the deck. And that's how I lay out 3 cards. If I'm doing a larger spread, and you can do much larger spreads, and I have videos on various spreads. My large general reading has 9 cards in it, past, present, and future. The 4 elements of fire, air, water, and earth, as well as something that is above or something to do, as something below or something not to do. My phone's going off here. And so you can have much larger spreads as well. There are whole books regarding spreads. Oftentimes guidebooks that you get will also have some spreads that are there. But if you're completely new, which is probably the people who would most often be watching this video, I am a big proponent, again, of just sticking with the 3 cards until you get comfortable with how you can read those in a story. And so how would I approach that? So let's say we would do a past, present, and future, which is a great way. You don't have to look at the future as this is going to happen, but you can look at the future card as this is where energy is moving towards. I don't believe in a fixed future. You understanding what you believe about the future is important when you're going to be reading, if you're going to use a future position. I believe that our future is created by our choices and decisions, as well as the choices and decisions of other people that are around us. And so it's always in flux, even though we have a general way that energy is moving. If we like the way it's moving, we keep moving and we keep making choices and decisions to move in that direction. If we don't like the way we move it, the future is moving, we start making choices and decisions to move us away from that. The cards, in my opinion, or any divination system, in my opinion, is just giving us information to help us to suss out, sort out what's going on around us and make good choices and decisions. In my opinion, a tarot reading should never take away your responsibility to making your own choices. So let's say we have a question of what do I need to know right now as I'm going forward into the future, and I pull 3 cards, and I have the Devil card in the past, I have the Knight of Cups in the present, and I have the 8 of Swords in the future. So in the past, I may have had instances in which I have given over my own power. I've given over my own responsibility for my own choices. And we don't, in our past impacts where we are right now. So in the present with the Knight of Cups, when I have that active energy that's going out and seeking emotional fulfillment, seeking a trust in our own power and our own instinct that the water cup represents to be in the water of the High Priestess, seeking out our connections and things of that nature with other people. If I have a habit, if in the past I've given over my power, I need to reclaim that so that I can go forward and trust my instincts a little bit better, because as things are moving forward, we have the 8 of Swords. The number 8 is about double fours. It can be very structured and a sense of mastery, but it can have a restrictive nature to it. In this case, it's a restriction of the mind. It is kind of trapping our own selves by our own choices and decisions. So I now have a reminder that in the past, I have given over my authority, my power. I've given over my responsibility for making my own choices, and that is impacting the way that I seek outward for emotional connection. And so I need to recover that so that I don't end up being a trap to my own self, that I don't trip my own self up, because this is all about the mind and the way that our mind can be our worst enemy for ourselves sometime. So using the cards to sort of build a story is, of course, the next phase in starting to work with the tarot card deck in a way that you can help use it to gain some insight on yourself, to gain some clarity and some insight into what a situation is going on. I like to look at tarot as doing weather forecasting. We know all the components that are going on around us. If we're a meteorologist, we can look at all the information that's going on around us, and we can make a judgment call. We can make a forecast of where things might be heading. It's not set in stone because weather patterns move and shift all the time, just as energy does, but we can get an idea of where things are heading, and tarot has a benefit of doing the same thing. You look at these cards and the symbols on the cards cause you to sort of think, oh yeah, I know what that could be, because you know yourself. You know the patterns that are going on. You know what happened in the past. You know the energy that's going on around you, and you can use the tarot as a mirror or as a computer screen to see the moving pieces and get an idea that, oh, if things are kind of heading in this direction. If I like that, I'm going to keep pushing the energy in that direction. If I don't quite like where it's headed, how can I use this information to shift the course of the energy that's going on around me? Again, that is just my interpretation of how one way that you can use the tarot cards to help with sussing out information and creating forecasts. So I hope that this very compressed, if not in time, in content, information will be helpful to someone who may be starting out in the world of tarot, welcome to a wonderful experience. Don't get too bogged down with particulars. Don't get too stressed out over doing things perfectly. Enjoy the process, and if you find yourself too bogged down into books or gaining too many decks where you start to get overwhelmed and you're not actually using your cards, take out a deck that you really love. Take out one book that is really helpful to you and get the cards on the table. Keep putting the cards on the table, because the only thing that is going to get you comfortable with working with any new system is doing it, and doing it over and over again. Start a journal. Write something down about each of the cards as it comes up. Track your readings in some way. There's a ton of information out there to be had, and is outside of the scope of this particular video, but have fun, enjoy yourself, and get the cards on the table.